Let's start with the image that changed everything this morning. 2 American warships, broad daylight, transponders fully on, sailing straight through the Strait of Hormuz, pushing deep into the Persian Gulf, then turning around and coming back out. No mines detonated, no Iranian Navy interception, no warning shots, nothing, just silence. And in geopolitics, silence from a regime that has spent weeks screaming threats at the top of its lungs. That silence is deafening. This is the first time since the war began that US warships have entered the Persian Gulf. Think about what that means. For weeks, the entire global shipping industry has been operating in a state of barely contained panic. Tanker captains rerouting, insurance premiums skyrocketing, energy markets twitching at every new headline out of Tehran. The world's most important choke point, the narrow stretch of water through which roughly 20% of the world's oil flows every single day, had effectively been held hostage. And this morning, the United States Navy walked right through the front door. To understand just how significant this is, we need to go back to the threat that created all of this fear in the first place. Iran didn't just wake up one day and announce a blockade. That would have been too obvious, too easy to call out. Instead, they did something much cleverer. They planted a seed of doubt. They quietly let it be known that the Strait of Hormuz had been mined. They didn't hand over maps. They didn't give coordinates. They just said there are mines down there. You don't know where. We do. So if you want safe passage, you come to us. It was a masterclass in asymmetric leverage. You don't actually have to block a shipping lane to shut it down. You just have to make the risk calculation impossible for the people trying to use it. A tanker captain facing a potential mine strike an insurance company looking at catastrophic liability, a shipping company that can't afford to lose a vessel. None of them need certainty. Doubt alone is enough to make them stop. And it worked, for a while. But then, 2 days ago, something interesting happened. An Iranian deputy foreign minister sat down for an interview. This was April 9th, just days ago, and confirmed the mines exist. He said ships need to communicate with Iranian military authorities before entering the strait because of what he called technical restraints tied to wartime conditions. He said Iran has a map. He said that's why coordination with Tehran is required for safe passage. Here's the problem with that statement. The New York Times just yesterday reported that Iran cannot actually locate the mines it placed itself. Read that again. Iran cannot find its own mines. Now, there are a few ways to interpret this. One possibility, the person who placed the mines and held the only copy of the map is now buried in rubble somewhere after American airstrikes. Another possibility, the map never existed in a usable form to begin with. It was a wartime operational detail that got lost in the chaos of a regime taking serious military hits. And then there's the third possibility, the one that some analysts have been quietly floating for days. Now, Iran never put down mines at all. The whole thing was psychological warfare, a bluff designed to make the strait functionally impassable without Iran ever having to do anything physically dangerous. Because here's the thing about actually placing underwater mines in one of the world's most surveilled waterways, it's an act of war. It invites immediate military retaliation. It gives the United States and its allies legal and strategic justification to respond with overwhelming force. Whereas claiming you've placed mines, that's just words. Words that achieve almost the same result with almost none of the risk. Whether the mines are real or not, President Trump this morning confirmed that US forces are actively carrying out mine clearing operations. And the 2 warships that made this transit, they sailed through in broad daylight, transponders on visible to everyone including Tehran. That's not an accident. That's a message. We're not afraid of your mines, real or imagined. Let's be direct about what happened here strategically, because the implications go far beyond a single naval transit. Iran's entire negotiating position in the talks currently happening in Pakistan rests on leverage. And leverage in this context means what happens to the global economy if you don't give us what we want. The answer to that question has always pointed back to the Strait of Hormuz. Control the strait and you hold a knife to the throat of the global oil market. You have the attention of not just the United States, but Europe, Asia, every major economy on Earth that depends on energy flowing through that narrow channel. Iran even put a number on it publicly. They said they would not allow more than 15 ships through the strait in a single day. That's the cap. That's the ceiling on global oil flow they were willing to tolerate. Everything above that number is leverage. But leverage only works when the other side believes you can enforce it. The moment 2 American warships sail through your supposedly mined, supposedly supposedly controlled waterway in the middle of the day, fully visible without so much as a radio challenge from your Navy, that belief starts to crack. And once it cracks, it's very hard to seal back up. Iran just lost a measurable piece of its most important bargaining chip at exactly the moment it needs it most. Now let's talk about those negotiations, because here is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. The setting is Pakistan, a deliberate choice of neutral ground, and what happened in the hours before the talks even began tells us more about Iran's true position than any public statement they've made. Before the US plane even touched down, the Iranian delegation was already there. They were waiting, 70 people by some estimates, not a skeleton crew of mid-level diplomats sent to buy time. A full serious delegation, economic experts, diplomatic experts, security experts. Even the IRGC representative that Tehran had been insisting on including, the one meant to ensure the Revolutionary Guard's interests were represented at the table, was on that plane. This is a regime that showed up ready to work, and here's why that matters so much. Because just before that delegation left Tehran, the head of the Iranian team made a very public statement. He said Iran had two conditions for attending these negotiations. First, a ceasefire in Lebanon. Second, the release of frozen Iranian assets, billions of dollars in sanctioned funds that Iran has been trying to claw back for years. He said if those conditions weren't met, Iran wasn't coming. The US responded essentially by shrugging. American officials said they never agreed to either of those conditions as prerequisites for talks. They weren't going to pressure Israel into a Lebanon ceasefire. And in the 24 hours that followed, Israel struck over 200 Hezbollah targets. Lebanon was burning. And as for the frozen funds, not a single dollar was released. US officials confirmed they made no such commitment. Both conditions completely unmet. Zero concessions from Washington. Iran came anyway. Vice President J.D. Vance stepped off the plane, met with Pakistani officials, and walked into a room with the Iranian delegation. As of Sunday morning, they had been behind closed doors for over 4 hours. There are two ways to read Iran's decision to show up despite getting nothing. The first reading is straightforward desperation. Iran has taken serious military hits. Its air defense networks have been degraded. Its economy was already strangled by sanctions before the war, and wartime conditions have made everything worse. The regime is under internal pressure it hasn't faced in decades, and now its primary source of external leverage, the Strait, is showing cracks. From this angle, Iran came to Pakistan because it had no real choice. The alternative is continued escalation against an adversary that has demonstrated it will absorb Iranian threats and hit back harder. The second reading is more tactical. Maybe those last-minute conditions were never serious. Maybe they were a final squeeze, a public move designed to extract one more concession from Washington before sitting down. If the US had blinked even partially, Iran would have walked into that room with a small win. When the US didn't blink, Iran had to make a choice: walk away entirely and lose the chance for a deal, or pocket the failed bluff quietly and negotiate anyway. They chose to negotiate. Either way, the outcome is the same. Iran made a public ultimatum. The US ignored it, and Iran showed up anyway. In the language of power, that is a signal. What's particularly painful for Tehran is that this whole sequence played out in full view of Hezbollah. The Lebanese militant group, Iran's most capable and most loyal proxy, is watching their patron make public demands on their behalf, then quietly walk those demands back and sit down with the Americans. All while Israeli strikes continue hammering Hezbollah positions across Lebanon. From Hezbollah's perspective, this looks like abandonment. Iran stood at the podium and said, "We won't negotiate while Lebanon burns," and then negotiated while Lebanon burned. That is going to damage the relationship between Tehran and its most powerful non-state ally in ways that will outlast whatever deal gets made in Pakistan. Proxy relationships are built on trust and credibility. Iran just spent some of both. And then there's China, because of course there's China. While negotiations are grinding away behind closed doors in Pakistan, US intelligence has picked up something that should make everyone in that room deeply uncomfortable. Beijing is preparing to deliver a new batch of air defense systems to Iran, and not just any systems. The specific weapons being transferred are MANPADS, man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. These are not strategic weapons. They're not designed to shoot down fighter jets at altitude or intercept cruise missiles. What they do is make life extremely dangerous for low-flying aircraft, helicopters, drones, close air support planes operating near the ground. They are the weapon of asymmetric warfare, small, concealable, devastating in the right hands, and we already know they work against American assets in this conflict because President Trump himself confirmed it. During the press conference following last week's rescue mission, Trump acknowledged that the F-15 that went down was hit by a handheld shoulder-fired missile. A manpad brought down one of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the American arsenal. That is not a footnote, that is a headline. Now, China is reportedly preparing to send more of them. Think about what Beijing is doing here strategically. China is not at the negotiating table in Pakistan. China has no formal role in whatever deal gets made between Washington and Tehran. But by quietly arming Iran with weapons that specifically threaten American air power, Beijing is buying itself a seat at the outcome regardless. If the ceasefire holds, China can point to its relationship with Tehran as leverage in broader US-China negotiations. If the ceasefire falls apart, American pilots will be flying into a more dangerous environment than they faced before, and China can watch from a safe distance as the US gets bogged back down in a conflict it was trying to exit. It is a classically patient Chinese strategic move. Don't fight the war, just make sure whoever is fighting it needs something from you. The timing is also worth noting. China is doing this while talks are ongoing, not after they collapse, not before they start right now in the middle of them. That sends its own message to Tehran. You have options beyond Washington. Don't give away too much. Step back far enough, and what you're seeing across the entire Middle East right now is a massive chaotic recalibration of power. Iran entered this conflict believing it had multiple layers of deterrence: the Strait, its proxies, its nuclear ambiguity, its relationship with China and Russia. One by one, those layers have been tested. The Strait is showing cracks. Hezbollah, its most powerful proxy, is bleeding. The nuclear program has taken physical hits that set it back in ways that are still being assessed. And while China is still providing some support, Beijing is doing so in ways that benefit China's interests first and Iran's second. Israel, meanwhile, is not stopping. Over 200 Hezbollah strikes in 24 hours is not a military force winding down. That is a military force that believes it has a window and is using it. The fact that US-Iran ceasefire talks are happening in Pakistan does not appear to have changed Israel's calculus in Lebanon at all. Which means that whatever deal gets made, if one gets made, it will need to somehow account for an Israeli military that is still actively operating against Iranian proxies, regardless of what Tehran and Washington agree to. Lebanon itself is caught in the middle of all of this in the most brutal way. The country was already fractured, economically devastated, politically paralyzed, still carrying the scars of the 2020 port explosion that destroyed Beirut's waterfront and killed hundreds of people. Now it's absorbing Israeli strikes, while the patron that was supposed to defend it negotiates a separate peace. For the Lebanese people watching this play out must feel like being a piece on a chessboard that the players have stopped looking at. Here's what we know. 2 US warships transited the Strait of Hormuz and came back without incident. Iran's mine threat, real or imagined, did not materialize into action. Negotiations are underway in Pakistan with a serious Iranian delegation that showed up despite getting nothing it publicly demanded. China is moving weapons in the background. Israel is striking Hezbollah. And somewhere in a room in Islamabad, J.D. Vance and a 70-person Iranian delegation are trying to figure out if there's a deal that both sides can live with. We don't know what's being discussed. We don't know where the fault lines are. We don't know if the people in that room are close to something real or just going through motions while both sides figure out their next move. What we do know is this Iran came to the table weaker than it was a month ago. The Strait is less secure as a bargaining chip than it was this morning. Hezbollah's faith in Tehran has taken a hit, and China's quiet maneuvering in the background is a reminder that this conflict was never just a bilateral story between Washington and Tehran. It's a chapter in something much larger. The Strait of Hormuz is open for now. The question is what it costs to keep it that way and who ends up paying. We'll be watching. When the reports from inside those rooms start coming out, we'll break it all down. Until then, stay with it. This is moving fast.